Morning. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and the topic is religion and global terrorism. And Dr. Baldwin has given us some excellent information as a foundation for some of the things that he would like to now bring to us, Dr. Baldwin, in reference to world religion and terrorism.
Yes, when we think of world religion and terrorism today, the first topic that comes to mind, of course, is ISIS. What's going on? ISIS, of course, means Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. And we think about what's going on in Syria, what's going on in Iraq. Iraq today is affected by terrorism more than any other country in the world. But when you look at it on a broader scale, you note that the countries most affected by terrorism are in Africa and Asia. And of course, Iraq happens to be the country that feels most of the brunt of terrorism. But we have to keep in mind that groups like ISIS and Boko Haram and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, these are groups that are putting religion to the service of intimidating people, of instilling fear in people, and of course, they are interested in territorial expansion and territorial control. So if you look at ISIS, for example, today, they control territory in Iraq and Syria, also in Yemen, and in Libya in North Africa, Nigeria in West Africa. So you're talking about a group that is involved in global terrorism, and you have to look at their understanding and interpretation of their religion in order to understand what they are about. They have this idea that the Quran, which is the holy book of Islam, and the Hadith, which of course include the teaching and activities and practices of the Prophet Muhammad, they argued that these sources support their understanding of jihad. Jihad meaning physical struggle against the enemies of Islam. So this is why you're seeing people being beheaded in Iraq and Syria, ISIS beheading Christians, killing Christians, because they view Christians as infidels. And so what you have here in the 21st century is something that we really didn't see a lot of in the 20th century, and that is this clash between different religions. Du Bois said in 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois, that the problem of the 20th century would be the problem of the color line. I agree with that for the 21st century as well. The problem of the color line continues, but I would add that we are also dealing with the problem of the religion divide.
Very good.
The problem of the religion divide, and a lot of that stems from the ways in which certain elements in Islam are interpreting and understanding Islam and putting that to the service of what? Of getting rid of what they consider to be infidels.
And so in a real sense, it's a continuation of a struggle, but and now how do you bring about some kind of resolution in reference to that, Dr. Baldwin? If religion is in a turmoil,
yes,
and we generally think in terms of religion as being for peace,
yes,
then how do you deal with that, with the whole fact of the turmoil in religion bringing forth peace?
Yeah, you just made an important statement there, because Islam literally means peace. And most scholars would tell you that the Prophet Muhammad was about peaceful change and peaceful coexistence with other peoples and religions of the world. But the problem here, I think, is that too few people who are part of major organized, institutionalized religions have actually come up with strategies for dealing with global terrorism. I don't think global terrorism will be defeated through military means. And most of our political leaders tend to think that. If you have the right military strategies, the right military means,
literally wipe them out.
Yeah, you can wipe them out. But I think it's more a war of ideals. And King and Gandhi often said that the defeat of the forces of violence and evil in the world boils down to what? A war of ideals. And I think we have to win that war. And so little is being put into that. We're putting a lot into military strategies, military missions, airstrikes against ISIS, for an example. But you don't hear people talking about the need to win the war of ideals. You cannot control the world through violence and fear and intimidation. Mohandas K. Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. told us that.
And so that's what ISIS is all about.
All
in the
about.
real
ISIS
sense,
is about that. Boko Haram is about that. The Taliban and Islamic State, Al Qaeda. They're about trying to control the world and to engage in territorial expansion and control through the use of fear and intimidation and terror.
Well, what's the ultimate objective? Is the ultimate objective is to destroy the world? But I mean, for what? I mean, for what?
I think it's to control the world. There's an apocalyptic narrative in this type of Islam that contributes to terrorism. And that apocalyptic narrative is all about what will happen in the end time, how the divine purpose will ultimately be fulfilled, how good will ultimately triumph over evil. And these forces of terrorism around the world see themselves as forces of good. And the rest of us are infidels. We are forces of evil. So that apocalyptic narrative plays out. In the end, they believe that they, constituting the forces of good, will win out and triumph over evil. And that's the bottom line.
And then what do they do?
Well, create the kind of state, a kind of theocracy that they think conforms to the will and purpose of Allah. That's what they want to do. And they want to do that worldwide, but they feel that one of the greatest enemies of world Islam, for an example, is Western values, Western societies. That's why Europe and America so often attacked. You know about the attack in France on Charlie Hebdo and the cartoonists who were doing cartoon depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. Some 12, 13 people killed. We know that in 2013 there was some 10,000 terrorist attacks around the world, and some 18,000 people died. So what you have here, of course, are groups of terrorists who claim to be adherents of Islam and who want to create a world order that conforms to their religious understandings and their religious teachings.
Dr. Baldwin, I tell you, that's extraordinary, and I think that in a real sense lays it out in terms of what we face, and that in reality that while we might bring guns against it, it's more than important is to bring ideas in reference to fighting it off. And so we're going to take our second break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.